I'm Colonel Rachel Ward, 41 years old, Army Medical Corps, 20 years in service, 15 of those on deployment, and 10 of those in places the news politely calls active combat zones. I've patched up people in desert heat so thick it clung to your throat, delivered babies under canvas in the middle of shellfire, and stitched wounds by flashlight while mortars thudded in the distance. You do this work long enough, and the smell of antiseptic starts to feel like home. I've never been one for medals or plaques. I keep them in a drawer, unpolished, because the real currency in this job is the look in someone's eyes when they wake up and realize they're still alive. That's the kind of thing you can't hang on a wall, but it stays in you, permanent, like shrapnel. Which is why the last place I expected to feel small was in a room full of uniforms. But that's exactly what happened the night of the Fort Lennox Gala. It's the kind of event where the marble floors shine so bright you could check your hair in them, the chandeliers drip light like melted gold, and the string quartet plays the kind of music that makes you feel like you're trespassing if you breathe too loud. Everyone was in full dress, ribbons straight, boots gleaming, backs ramrod straight. I wore mine too, partly out of tradition, partly because it felt like armor. I spotted my family almost immediately. My mother was posted under an archway like she was on guard duty for the country club set. Pearls around her neck, lips pursed just enough to imply disappointment. Beside her was my older brother Daniel, former intel officer, now defense consultant, which is code for someone who gets paid a lot to talk in vague terms. He still carried himself like the army owed him a thank you note. I wasn't going to engage them right away. Small talk with my family is like walking through a minefield without a map. But Daniel saw me first. He gave me the kind of slow once-over you give a car you don't think should be on the road. Then, with a smirk that could cut steel, he said it. "Try not to make a scene tonight, Rachel. Some of us have careers to protect. You know, liability issues." It was quiet enough that the couple next to him heard, but not loud enough for anyone to call him on it. That's his specialty. Precision-targeted humiliation. My stomach dropped, not because I believed him, but because I knew he meant it. He'd said versions of it before, in emails, in offhand comments at family dinners. This was just the first time he'd done it with a martini in hand and a chandelier overhead. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of flinching. I've faced snipers with better aim. I straightened my shoulders, gave him a slow blink, and turned my attention to the far corner of the room where a cluster of junior officers were laughing too loudly. It was either that, or let him see how deep the barb had gone in. The rest of the evening his words sat in my head like a ticking device, steady and unavoidable. Liability. As if the years I'd spent keeping soldiers alive under impossible conditions were some kind of PR problem. As if I was the risk, and not the reason half my unit had made it home. I left the gala early. On the drive back to my quarters, the city lights blurred past the tinted glass, and I caught my reflection in the window. Dress blues neat, medals crooked because I hadn't bothered to fix them after dinner. I thought about yanking them all off and shoving them in that same drawer where the rest of them lived. But I didn't. Not yet. That was the night I decided something had to give. Not the kind of give where you let go and walk away quietly. No, the kind where you push back just enough to make the other person wonder if maybe they've been underestimating you all along. Family history is a funny thing. People like to pretend it's a tapestry, woven together, all the threads connected. But mine always felt more like a patchwork quilt with a few squares missing and a couple others stitched in upside down. I grew up in a house where respect was rationed. My dad, a decorated infantry officer, could do no wrong. My brother Daniel was groomed to be the golden child before he could even tie his own boots. My mother played the role of quiet enforcer. Her approval was as rare as snow in July, and twice as fleeting. Me? I was the kid who tagged along at change of command ceremonies, sitting on folding chairs too big for my legs to reach the floor, absorbing every speech about honor and duty. I thought if I memorized enough of them, I'd earn a place in the family's inner circle. When I enlisted, I thought they'd finally take me seriously. Daniel was already in intel, so I figured having two uniforms in the family would be a point of pride. Instead, my mother clucked her tongue and said, "Well, at least you'll have something to fall back on when you're done playing soldier." Daniel just smirked and said, "Try not to slow anyone down." The thing is, I wasn't slow. In training, I beat most of my male peers on the obstacle course. I learned to stitch a field wound in under 90 seconds. I carried gear heavier than I was through mud so thick it could swallow a boot hole. And still, letters from home came addressed to "our little helper." Over the years, their doubt became background noise. On my first deployment, I sent a photo of me standing in front of a medevac chopper, dust still in my hair from the landing. Daniel replied with a single line, "Nice prop." When I earned my commission, my mother's first question was whether I'd still be doing nurse work, or if I'd finally have some authority. The moments that should have been milestones became footnotes in their version of my life. I was never a soldier to them, not really, just a supporting character in Daniel's saga. It wore on me, but I learned to keep it tucked away. Until a few years ago, when the pattern sharpened into something uglier. There was a reunion at my parents' house, a rare occasion where everyone was under the same roof. The room was full of laughter until someone asked me how my deployment had gone. Before I could answer, Daniel cut in with, "Rachel's job is to make coffee until the real work starts." Everyone laughed. My mother sipped her wine like it was all in good fun. I laughed too, but it was the hollow kind. That night, in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and replayed it over and over. The timing, the smirk, the way no one stepped in. That was the night I stopped bringing stories home. So when Daniel called me a liability at the gala, it wasn't a slip. It was an evolution. Years of undercutting distilled into one word, delivered with the precision of someone who knows exactly where your armor is thin. I wish I could say I brushed it off, but the truth is, it stuck. It reminded me of every rolled eye, every dismissive shrug, every "don't take it personally" I'd swallowed for decades. And it wasn't just about me, it was about the way they decided, long ago, that I would always be the lesser ward. The worst part? A small, treacherous part of me wondered if they were right. That little voice in my head, the one that whispered maybe they were right, has been my shadow for years. It showed up on the long flights into deployment zones, when the hum of the engines left too much space for doubt. It crept in after long nights in field hospitals when the adrenaline wore off, and the only thing left was exhaustion and the smell of blood that wouldn't wash out. But here's the thing: shadows can't survive without light. And I had plenty of proof that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I think back to my third tour in Afghanistan, the one that nearly broke me and made me at the same time. Our unit got caught in a firefight outside of Kandahar, and the casualties were coming in faster than we could clear the stretchers. One soldier, Specialist Mateo, was brought in with shrapnel wounds across his abdomen. He was barely conscious, skin the color of paper. The surgeon on call was tied up with another critical patient, so it fell to me. I remember the way my hands moved without hesitation. Compress, suture, check vitals, repeat. I remember the cold metal of the surgical scissors biting into my palm as I worked. We stabilized him, got him prepped for evac, and he lived. A month later, I got a letter from his mother thanking me for keeping her boy breathing long enough to come home. She'd enclosed a photo of him grinning with a fishing pole in his hand. That photo stayed in my locker for the rest of the tour. There was also Sergeant Mac McAllister, a grizzled infantry vet who'd taken a round to the shoulder. He'd snarled at me when I tried to check his vitals. Save your time for someone who's actually hurt. I ignored him, kept working, and when he came to my quarters the next day to thank me, he left a ration pack of his favorite coffee on my desk without a word. Little things like that stick. These aren't stories my family ever heard. Not because I was hiding them, but because I learned early that telling them would get me the polite nod, the change of subject, or Daniel's favorite. Well, that's your job, isn't it? It's funny. Military life taught me to operate under pressure, but family taught me to operate under dismissal. I could get recognition from a general in the field, but come home and be reduced to Daniel's sister who plays soldier. That contrast was sharp the year I earned the Meritorious Service Medal. We'd lost a lot of good people that deployment, but we'd also saved dozens through coordinated field triage and fast medevac decisions. When I got the medal, my CO told me it wasn't just for the saves, but for keeping the team steady when the ground under us kept shifting. My mother's response when I told her? Don't let it go to your head. I learned to compartmentalize. Out there in the dust and noise, I was confident. I knew what I could do, what I had done. Back home, I shrank myself down, like trying to fit into a uniform 2 sizes too small. That's why Daniel's liability jab at the gala hit harder than I wanted to admit. It wasn't new. It was the same tune he'd been humming for years. But this time, I realized something dangerous. He'd started playing it where others could hear. In my world, perception is half the battle. If people start to believe you're a risk, it doesn't matter what your record says. I left that night knowing 2 things. 1, I wasn't going to keep letting my brother write my story for me. And 2, if he wanted to turn this into a public game, I could play it too. Only I wouldn't be the one slinging shadows. I'd be the one dragging things into the light. The first sign something was off came a week later, in the form of a friendly heads-up from a colleague I trusted. We were grabbing burnt coffee in the mess when she leaned in and said, "Hey, just so you know, there's been chatter." Chatter. The kind of word that in military circles means someone's aiming for you, but they're too smart to load the gun where you can see it. I pressed her, and she finally said it. Someone had been asking around about my Kandahar after-action reports. Not in the official review sense. In the dig until you find something you can twist sense. I knew immediately who was behind it. Daniel has a particular signature when he's on the attack. No direct hits, just well-placed whispers, a few strategically planted doubts. Enough to make people start with, "I heard," and end with, "Well, you know how she is." Within days, I started noticing the subtle shifts. A captain I'd worked with for years avoided eye contact in a meeting. A request for me to brief a group of incoming medics got rescheduled indefinitely. A colonel who usually joked with me in the hallway went stiff, offering only a curt nod. Then came the vague rumor, one I heard secondhand in the most casual, gut-punch way possible. Someone mentioned liability in high-pressure ops, almost like it was part of my official title. It's incredible how fast poison spreads when no one sees who's pouring it. The thing is, I could have ignored it. Kept my head down, done my work, hoped it blew over. That's how I survived plenty of deployments, by staying too busy to care about politics. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was home turf. And the battlefield here was perception. The tipping point came when I got a call from a civilian contact in logistics. "Rachel," he said, "you might want to know. Your name came up in a closed door with some DoD contractors." The phrase used was, "public relations risk?" I actually laughed because it was absurd. I don't do press. I'm not the kind of officer who courts the spotlight. But that was the genius of it. Frame me as a problem before I ever got a chance to speak for myself, and who just so happened to be consulting for a group of those contractors. Daniel. I could picture his smirk when he planted the seed. Liability, PR risk, high-pressure liability. It was all the same poison, just bottled differently. I kept my face neutral whenever I caught wind of the whispers, but inside, I was cataloging. Dates, sources, patterns. If he wanted to play this game, I was going to keep the receipts. And yet, part of me still didn't want to believe he'd go this far. Petty insults at family dinners were one thing. Undermining my career? That was another level. But Daniel had a way of convincing himself that anything he did was for the good of the family. I could hear his voice in my head even now. If Rachel stumbles, better it's because I set the tripwire than someone else. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about control. As long as I stayed under his thumb, safe, small, predictable, he could keep playing the golden sun. But if I started to be seen, really seen, by people in his world, that threatened the whole arrangement. So he decided to make sure I stayed in the shadows. The trouble for him was, I've worked in plenty of shadows. I know how to move in them, and I know how to drag someone into the light when the time is right. The irony is that the spark for all of this came from something good. 2 weeks after the gala, I got an email from General Marcus Ellery. If you've spent any time in the medical corps, you know his name. He's the kind of officer who has a wing at Walter Reed named after him. The subject line was simple: invitation to speak. I opened it expecting some form letter, but it was personal. He'd been at the gala, quiet in the back, apparently, and had watched the moment I'd danced with Captain Hayes, a double amputee still in rehab. He wrote that he'd never seen a soldier's posture change so fast, and he credited me for giving him dignity instead of pity. He wanted me to come to Walter Reed and speak to a group of officers and enlisted in recovery. Not about tactics, not about procedure, about resilience. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Someone at his level didn't just toss out invitations like that. It wasn't a career move. It was a mark of respect. I should have been proud. Instead, my first thought was, Daniel's going to hate this. Sure enough, the call came less than 24 hours later. He didn't bother with a hello. I hear you're planning to make some kind of speech? I kept my tone flat. It's not a speech. It's a talk for recovering soldiers. You don't see how that's going to look? His voice was that condescending calm he uses when he thinks he's talking to a child. You show up, start telling stories, and suddenly you're the face of the wounded warrior cause. That's going to draw attention, Rachel. The wrong kind. That phrase, the wrong kind, was our mother's favorite. It meant anything that reflected well on me but didn't fit their version of the Ward family brand. I'm going, I said. There was a pause. Then he went in for the kill. Fine, but don't be surprised if things start getting difficult for you. And then he hung up. I sat there staring at the silent phone. It was such a Daniel move. Make the threat sound like a weather report. For a second, I wondered if I should back out. But then I thought about Captain Hayes's face when he stood up from that chair, about the way the room had gone silent. Not out of pity, but out of respect. And I knew I wasn't backing down. The next day, I confirmed with General Ellery's aide. Date, time, travel orders. I even dug my old field notebook out of my desk drawer, the one I'd carried through 2 deployments, to jot down a few ideas. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. No greeting, just, be careful. He's not going to let this go. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about Daniel just running his mouth anymore. This was about him making sure I stayed invisible. And I was done with invisible. The warning text sat on my phone like a loaded round. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering, before I typed back, "Who is this?" A few seconds passed. Then, "Someone who knows what he's capable of." I knew without asking that he meant Daniel. I pushed again. "What's he planning?" This time, the reply came with an attachment. PDFs, court documents, Financial records? I opened the first page and felt my stomach knot. They were divorce filings, Daniel's, along with settlement agreements I'd never seen. Buried in the pages were email exchanges where he threatened his ex-wife's career if she spoke publicly about their marriage. Halfway through the stack, I found the smoking gun. A forwarded message from Daniel to a contractor contact. If we can discredit Rachel at Walter Reed, we can kill the whole pilot program. She's the symbol. Take her down. The narrative dies. The sender's name was at the bottom. Mira Stanton Ward, Daniel's ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd vanished from the family orbit like she'd never been there. I texted, "Why now?" Her reply was short. "Because I saw what you did for that captain. And because you didn't flinch." I sat back, phone still in my hand. This wasn't just sibling rivalry gone toxic. Daniel was actively working to undermine not just me, but the very idea that someone like me, a combat medic, a woman, an officer, could belong on the front lines. For a few hours, I paced my quarters, thinking. I'd been in firefights where the next step was obvious. Get low, find cover, return fire. This was different. This was chess. And Daniel had been moving pieces for months, maybe years. But now I had proof. By morning, I'd made my decision. I scanned everything, redacted what needed redacting, verified the metadata on the emails. Then I compiled it into a single airtight file. No leaks to the press, no social media grandstanding. This was going straight to the Inspector General's office under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act. When I hit send, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no victory rush, just the same steadiness I'd felt after stabilizing a patient. Work done, job finished. Now wait for the outcome. Within 24 hours, I got a confirmation of receipt. Within 72, Daniel's clearance was suspended pending investigation. It wasn't public yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. And that was fine. I wasn't looking for spectacle. I was looking for daylight. 2 days later, I boarded the flight to Walter Reed with the file copy tucked in my bag, next to my field notebook. Whatever Daniel thought he'd take from me, I still had this. The ability to walk into a room full of soldiers, broken, healing, doubting, and remind them they were still worth standing up for. That was something no rumor, no whisper campaign, and no brother could take away. The Pentagon's review room is nothing like the TV dramas. No grand chamber, no spotlights, no pounding gavels, just a modest glass-walled conference space overlooking the Potomac. A long round table, a few senior officers, and folders thick enough to make your wrists ache if you carried them too long. I wasn't there to speak, only to observe. At least, that's what the invitation had said. My legal liaison sat to my right, pen tapping softly against her notepad. Across the table, Daniel was already in place, wearing a suit so sharp it could cut glass, posture perfect. When his eyes met mine for a split second, I saw it. The flicker. Surprise. He hadn't expected me to be here. The chair of the review committee, a 2-star with a calm, almost surgical tone, began with procedural matters. My name came up in the context of a specific incident. Forward Operating Post Lion, June 14, 2017. I knew instantly what this was. Kandahar, the night we'd been overrun. The same night Daniel and his friends had been painting as my reckless liability moment in their whispers. Then the chair said, "We've invited someone who was there that night to provide a first-hand account." The door opened, and in walked Lieutenant Commander Dana Kelso. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen her in years. She'd been our surgical lead that night. Steady hands, sharp mind, no patience for politics. She took the seat across from me and spoke with the same clipped efficiency I remembered. "I served with Colonel Ward at FOB Lion. On June 14th, our comms were cut for over 8 hours. We had 9 critical casualties in the triage center. Colonel Ward coordinated and stabilized all 9, including 2 abdominal bleeds, a partial amputation, and a collapsed lung. No one died under her care that night. Her voice didn't waver. She described the moment the secondary wall was breached. How I'd dragged a soldier still on oxygen behind the inner defense line while taking shrapnel to my leg. How I'd refused morphine until the others were stable. Then came the question from the chair. Why was this not included in the initial report? I was medevaced the next morning for infection risk, she said. By the time my statement cleared the chain, the report was closed. I didn't know there was ever a question about her performance until recently. I glanced at Daniel. His jaw had gone tight, but his expression stayed blank. And then, from the far end of the table, a voice I hadn't heard yet. General Ellery. For the record, he said, I requested this review after seeing Captain Hayes, my son, walk 6 steps under Colonel Ward's watch. I will not see integrity penalized because it makes some people uncomfortable. The room went quiet, not the awkward kind, more like the air had shifted. The kind of quiet you get just before something irreversible happens. By the end of the session, the committee had agreed to reopen the record on the Lion incident. My file would reflect the full account, Dana's statement included. When we filed out, Daniel avoided my gaze entirely. For the first time in years, I realized he didn't have the room. And maybe he knew it too. The recognition event wasn't supposed to be a big deal. At least, that's what the invite had said. Small gathering, internal commendation, no press. I'd been to enough of these to know they were usually stiff affairs. A few polite claps, some handshakes, then everyone retreats to their offices. But when I walked into the base auditorium that morning, the air felt different. Every seat was filled, uniforms pressed, medals catching the light, the low murmur of voices dying down as I stepped inside. The smell of polished wood mixed with the faint tang of coffee from the urns in the lobby. General Ellery stood at the podium, posture as precise as the crease in his slacks. He opened with a few lines about valor, but not the kind you find in combat reports. There is a courage, he said, in standing still when the world wants to push you back, in choosing to show up when silence would be easier. Then he called my name. I walked to the stage, boots steady on the carpeted steps. From up there, the faces in the crowd blurred into a sea of color patches and brass. Ellery's voice carried over the room. Colonel Ward didn't just save lives in the field. She's reminded us that recovery is not weakness, and that leadership can look like giving others the space to move forward on their own terms. When he placed the medal around my neck, the metal was cool against my skin. He leaned in just enough for me to hear. This should have happened a long time ago. I'm sorry it didn't. I nodded once. It happened when it needed to, sir. Then it happened. The kind of moment you don't script because you can't. One by one, the officers in the audience stood. Not with shouts or applause at first, just the sound of chairs scraping back. And then the clapping began, building until it filled every corner of the hall. I scanned the crowd. Midway back, I spotted Dana Kelso, arms folded but smiling like she'd just seen a mission succeed against the odds. And in the very back row, half in shadow, was Daniel. No uniform, no smug expression, just stillness. Our eyes met for a second, and I caught something I'd never seen there before. Not anger, not superiority. Maybe resignation, maybe recognition. He didn't clap right away, but as the applause rolled on, he finally raised his hands and joined in. Just enough to be seen, but not enough to claim the moment. And for once, I didn't need him to. Because the truth was, this wasn't about him at all. As the ovation went on, I realized something that surprised me. It wasn't pride swelling in my chest. It was relief. Relief that I'd told the truth, stood my ground, and hadn't let someone else's version of me be the only one on record. When I stepped down from the stage, a young lieutenant I didn't know stopped me in the aisle. "Ma'am," she said, "thank you for making it clear we don't have to shout to be heard." That, more than the medal, more than the applause, was the real victory. After the ceremony, I walked out into the crisp afternoon air with the medal still resting against my uniform. The sun caught on the edge of it, and for a second I thought about all the people who'd tried to tell me this moment would never come, sometimes with a smirk, sometimes with a smile, but always with certainty. I didn't head back to my quarters right away. Instead, I cut across the courtyard toward the rehab wing at Walter Reed. I'd promised Captain Hayes I'd stop in, and after everything, I wanted to keep that promise. The place was alive with quiet energy, braces clicking, rubber soles squeaking against mats, soft encouragement from therapists. Hayes was there, leading a group drill like he'd been doing it for years. When he noticed me, he waved me over and said to the room, "This is the one who reminded me I could take the first step." I laughed it off, but a young private with a prosthetic leg piped up. "She reminded me too." Then another voice from the back. "And me." It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Little ripples spreading out until I realized half the people in the room had their own version of that story. That's when it hit me. This was my family now. Not the one that shared my last name, but the one forged in the spaces between orders, in the quiet moments when someone decides to try again. Later, back in my quarters, I sat with the medal in my lap and thought about Daniel, about my mother, about all the times I'd shrunk myself down to fit inside the box they'd built for me. And for the first time, I felt no pull to prove anything to them. Because here's the truth. Recognition is nice, but it's not the point. The point is knowing, deep down, that you stood when it mattered, even if no one was watching. That you moved forward even when someone you loved was trying to pull you back. If you're reading this and you've ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to lift you up, I hope you hear me when I say this. Your worth isn't up for debate. Not in a boardroom, not at a family dinner, not in the back row of a ceremony where they only clap because everyone else is. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting for their applause altogether. I used to think my story was about surviving their doubt. Now I know it's about outgrowing the need for their permission, and that, more than any medal, is what feels like victory. The medal sits on my desk now, not in a drawer, not because I need to see it every day, but because it reminds me of the simple truth I fought so long to learn. Visibility isn't arrogance, and strength isn't loud. A week after the ceremony, Daniel asked to meet. Neutral ground, a coffee shop near the river. He looked tired, like the weight of holding his version of the story had finally worn him down. We didn't argue. We didn't rehash the past. He didn't apologize, not outright, but he also didn't try to diminish me. That was enough. When we parted, he said, "I guess you proved me wrong." I just smiled and told him, "I didn't do it for you." That night, I walked down to the rehab wing's courtyard. They'd strung up paper lanterns between the oaks, casting warm pools of light on the worn flagstones. Someone had dragged out an old speaker, and soft music hummed into the cool air. It wasn't a formal event, just a gathering of people who had been through their own battles, visible and invisible. Hayes was there, laughing with a young corporal who was taking her first steps without crutches. I stood at the edge of the light for a while, just watching. Every movement was imperfect. Braces squeaked, someone tripped, a wheelchair rolled over someone's foot. But there was nothing tentative about it. Every step was claimed, owned. When Hayes saw me, he waved me into the circle. "Tonight," he said, "we dance for you." I shook my head. "No, tonight we dance for us." And so we did. Awkward shuffles, spins that ended in laughter, chairs swaying to the beat. No choreography, No audience to impress. Just us, claiming space in our own way. I thought about the long arc that had brought me here. The whispers, the undermining, the word liability hurled like a weapon. I thought about the nights I'd doubted myself because the people closest to me couldn't see me, and I thought about how wrong I'd been to wait for them to. If there's one thing I want anyone hearing this to take away, it's this. Your story doesn't need their stamp of approval to be worth telling. The applause feels good, sure, but the real victory is knowing you're living in a way you can stand by, even if no one claps. So tell me, where are you listening from? Is it a quiet morning coffee, or one of those nights where stories like this keep you company? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, because in the end, this isn't just my story. It's ours. The story of anyone who's been told they don't belong, only to stand up in a room full of doubters and be met with the sound of chairs scraping back as people rise to their feet. And when that moment comes for you, I hope you remember, you were never a liability. You were the reason they're still standing. We'll see each other in the next story. Until then, keep moving forward, whether they clap or not.